Alright guys, today we are talking about bending and twisting the torso, but we also kind of have to talk about reviewing some of the material that we already know. So if you have seen my video on the torso, we know the basics of what's going on, right? We know the proportions and stuff like that. If you guys haven't seen it, I would go check that out probably before you watch this video because it's going to help to have that base understanding. But just a really quick run through, let's go through some review. Oh, are you guys wondering who's this guy? Well, that's Flower. He's just the cutest little assistant there is. I mean, look at his face. I mean, so the torso. What are some things that we need to review from the torso? Well, there's a couple things that we need to keep in mind. We got the proportions that we know. So we know that somewhere from the chin to here is about one head size, which should show us somewhere around where the belly button is, which is going to show us somewhere around where the bottom of the pubic bone is, right? We don't need to measure this out every time we draw it. We just want to keep this in our mind. Similarly with anatomy, where we also want to remember that we have a rib cage in here that is egg-shaped, and then we also have our pelvis in here down there. So we have to remember to think of these things as simple shapes as well. Bending and twisting this form is not only going to make our pictures look more dynamic, but it's also going to overcomplicate some of the things we're drawing. And so if you're thinking too tightly on proportions and anatomy, your picture will probably still come out pretty stiff no matter how much you bend or twist. But if we can break these down into simple shapes, we can kind of understand it better. So let's take a little closer look at the anatomy. So inside of the torso, we have our rib cage and we have our pelvis, right? The way we're going to think about this is simply like we mentioned before, where we got our egg shape here. And the way we're going to think about the pelvis today is we're actually going to think about it like an open box. So if you guys can see, right, we got the top of the box and then the bottom of the box is down here. Something like that. So, because we want to remember these things as 3D forms. That's going to be really important when we're drawing these dynamic shapes because things pinch and they bend and they twist. And in order to show that in a 3D space where we have to remember that we're not paper thin, right? We're not a 2D drawing, a cartoon or something like that. It's like we can reach through the rib cage and come out the top. Right? We have to remember that these things wrap around. There's a thickness to it. It's not just a flat shape. It holds things inside. And then so remembering this is going to be a big part of how we understand bending the form without overcomplicating it, because that's going to be our biggest enemy right now, is overcomplicating the shapes. So simple shapes in 3D form, we're pretty much just thinking when we're thinking about the body in general, not just the torso. We're thinking about shapes like the cylinder, different forms of like cone shapes where it's probably not going to be an actual cone, right? But we can see that tapering shape in there of the cylinder. And of course, we have plenty of boxy shapes as well and rectangles and stuff like that. Even if we're drawing a full-on character, we want to be thinking of them as being 3D objects in a 3D world, right? Just like we are. We don't exist on a flat, singular plane. And in order to create realism, dynamics, and excitement in your pictures, we also need to be thinking about these things within our own drawings as well. So what kind of shape will we be using today? Well, in order to simply break this down, and we're just looking at the torso, remember, not the whole figure today, is we're just going to use a rectangular shape. This is going to be something that's not hard on the edges. You want to keep it nice and soft, but we want to be thinking about the plane changes and what we can see. So if we start with this guy, and I'm just going to kind of trace over him, I can see this shape. But then I also know that this part right here, this is the side of his body. It's not the front. This is the front. This is his stomach, right? So we have two different planes here. So how do we show that? Well, the easiest way is just to kind of consider it like a rectangle, right? So he's here like that. His form is kind of bending with his spine there. You can bend this with it, and then you can close that shape off. We're trying to break it down into one simple shape for today because we're going to start thinking about these drawings and breaking down these references as we look at them, my other references that I have, into these simple shapes. So looking at her, and it's going to be the same thing, female versus male here, the same idea. I just need to be able to figure out where the front is versus where the side is. Okay, pretty much easy to break down right here. Front, I can see that I'm starting to see some of her side here. Right. And then just like that, we have our torso shape. So if you guys remember Flower from the beginning of this presentation, who was leading us into our review, this is where Flower is going to come in and help us. So say hi to Flower, everyone. And just take a moment to look how cute that little face is. Oh my. So how Flower is going to help us today is we're going to use that shape that is created with a sack of flour, where we have kind of like two masses and usually a bending point. Okay, because this is going to give us the exact same feeling of a torso bending, where if I lean over right now to one side, I have a stretched side, and I also have a side that's bending into itself. It's folding in, right? That's why our skin is flexible and can stretch to a certain extent. So having this kind of base simple structure, something that's much more simple to draw than a torso, a bag of flour, it's going to help us not to complicate this in our mind. So we're going to use flour here to understand breaking down complex torso positions into a simple shape. So you guys can see here, I position the flour bag in a couple different positions. My goal here is to give them some emotions. I want to think about mass for a big part of it. I want to think about mass. So what I mean by that is, you can see I made him thicker down here than he is up here to show that the weight of the bag is moving down. He's heaviest at the bottom. This is something that can also occur and make our pictures look more dynamic when we're showing bending and twisting of form. I also want to be able to show line of action. Super important here. Line of action helps me keep that form and that twist, that curve, whatever it is happening in my picture. That line of action is the most necessary step in any kind of figure drawing, life drawing scenario when we're trying to keep our poses dynamic. The reason we're using this flower sack is because we're also trying to think of that two form kind of position, right? Just like we have rib cage and pelvis, the flower sack kind of helps us provide that looking point. So we're going to look at these references today, and what we're going to do is we're going to break them down, understanding the form that they're showing us, and then we're going to draw it as a flower sack next to it. So let's look at this picture really quick right here. So we have a picture of someone that looks like they might have just fallen from the sky, right? So already thinking about how I was just talking about mass and form, we should know that the mass is sitting down here pretty heavy versus up here, right? Which means that we probably want something to represent thicker down here. But let's break this down a little bit. Thinking about our simple shapes, we have a bending form here. I can see this part of the torso. I know that it looks like this part of the torso is about the front side, but his body, the line of action, is on a curve, which means that I'm seeing both bottoms or tops, whatever you want to consider them, of this rectangular shape. If we were to see the rest of this picture in motion, maybe his pelvis would go over his head. So now that we have that broken down, what we're going to do is we're going to come over here. We're going to use our best friend Flower, and we're going to just try to draw him as a flower sack, and we're going to try to represent the emotion that's going on in here too, and the bending and twisting of that torso. Really important that we get that backwards C shape before we even do anything. So first things first, I'm going to put that in there, and now we get to draw our shape. I'm really trying to keep this loose, sketchy. If we overthink it, we're going to lose that motion in our picture. So I like to use the idea of like the little kind of ends of the bag to represent the limbs here. So you can kind of have fun with that. What do you want the limbs to be doing? I'm just kind of copying the pose here a little bit. So there it is. We kept it nice, simple, easy. One thing you can draw too is maybe if you want to think about like the seam of the bag, right? To kind of help you represent that side. You guys can see I kept it smaller up here, wider down here, thinking about my mass being gathered in this position right here. Okay, where he's landing. And that's pretty much it. I could take this now and I could go in and add the torso dynamics over it. But let's just keep practicing. Let's just stay simple and easy. Let's jump to our next reference. All right, pretty dynamic pose here, right? It looks like this guy's about to do some sort of kick. So there's a lot of movement and motion that we're getting, even from this still picture. We know that at the point that this picture was taken right after his leg probably dropped down to the ground or whatever he was doing, we can see that in our head. Our imagination finishes that picture for us. So we want to use that. We want to be thinking about that motion in our head. A couple things that we also see, we kind of have a lot going on. I can see a little bit of his front, a lot of side, and we can even see a little bit of his back. But we got to break that down into like a more simple 3D form. So knowing our line of action here is what's going to help. And the line of action is going to follow his spine right through here. And it's going to kind of follow up into like a J shape there. All right, so now we have to find our shape within here now that we have our line of action. And what we're pretty much seeing is a very small, thin shape up here. And then it gets bigger as it gets closer to us. And then, of course, this is going to wrap around and give us that shape of that kick, right? So it starts thin here, and then it gets wider as it twists in front. You guys see that? It almost looks like a scoop or a chip, right? So if we draw this as our flower shape, it's pretty much right there in the drawing. We're going to draw that tilt that we see right here. We got to remember our sweeping line of action. Okay, now we can draw in our little tags here. And then we know that the other leg is coming from behind the body, right? So technically, it would be coming from somewhere here, starting here, but we'd only see this part of it. And if you want, you can kind of draw a little foot on there. And that gives us our little flower sac there. Remember, we're thinking of just two masses. All right, so we have a nice bending pose right here. One thing I really want to emphasize with this is the idea of simple versus complex. These exist on the same drawing, but what you want to be thinking in your head is one side needs to be more simple. See how that whole side could essentially be represented almost all the way to the leg down here as just one sweep. But then this side becomes complex with all these different curves going on. And obviously we're only focusing on the torso here, but this gives a more dynamic feeling to the picture. It also lets the viewer know where you want their attention to be going towards. Okay. But this also enforces the stretch and compression side of the body, right? When one side is being stretched, the other side is being compressed. And we need to remember that too when we're thinking about twisting forms. First things first, line of action. And this is as simple as any line of action gets. It's just going to go straight through. And now we got to think about this. So what we can do too is if the rectangle or anything's confusing you, think about the shapes first. We have our mass up here, our rib cage, and then we have our mass down here. Okay, and you want to think about that more of a boxy shape. So then you can just combine the two. So we have this shape coming into here like that, and then this shape stretching all the way like that. We're seeing more of the side here. So let's see if we can draw this as flower. All right, first thing, sweeping line of action. Make sure we got our curve with the right direction of the shoulders there. We have our stretch, really stretching that side of the bag. And then we have our compression here where we got a longer, and then it comes out and compresses nice and short, but wide. on this side. So now use those tags to emphasize it even more. So I'm going to follow this curve, this line of action, and the little bag is going to come out to here. And then we know that this one is coming over here like this. So you can do that little action if you like. Follow that flow and whatever you want to do for this arm. See a little bit of the side here, more of the side here. You can see that little seam just really kind of helps represent that 3D aspect, okay? But what we really want to emphasize is the fact that one side is being crunched in and the other side is being nice and stretched open, okay? All right, similar pose here, so it should be a similar breakdown. First things first, line of action. Coming through. And it's going down this way. Okay, we got a really nice bending boomerang shape here. And then we can really see this compression here versus this really deep stretch over here. And we want to show that. And we can definitely see the plane change here because look, if I just follow the shadow shape, that already gives me the side of the torso. So one thing I'll use this pose to represent is the shoulders and the hips interact with each other in a very specific way. What I mean by that is when the shoulders are going this way in this specific kind of a diagonal, the hips will do the opposite motion where they're going to go the other way. Okay, this happens in less dynamic poses too, where someone just kind of shifts their weight to one leg and the balance on their body has to change. And this is kind of how your body counterbalances. It displaces the weight onto one side. So one side becomes stretched and the other side becomes compressed, but it's only a slight difference, right? But here, obviously, we can see that in a more extreme light. So that's a really important tool going into figure drawing or gesture drawing for you guys to remember is always think about what is the placement of the shoulders versus what is the placement of the hips. All right, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but here we go. Line of action. And we draw our flower sack shape. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to draw that stretch side first. I just think that stretch side is the easiest. We know what it's doing. It's pretty much just following that line of action, right? So there's my stretch. I know that the shoulders are doing something like this. It's coming in here and popping out over here and coming up like that. So just very quick, right? Remember, mass versus mass, what's happening? You can also compare over here, what's thicker? This is definitely a thicker shape versus this is a thinner shape. It could just be a body type thing, you know, it could just be where his weight is being pushed towards the movement, but you want to think, what are you trying to represent? What kind of motion do you want? Last reference here, we're going to break it down. I'm going to find the line of action. I'm going to find the rectangle shape on her, and then I'm going to draw a flower next to her. But what I'm going to do too, to show why we're doing this, is then I'm going to overlay on top of flower, and I'm going to draw the torso form. So that way we can kind of see. So let's do the breakdown first. Find that line of action. It comes through. And now we need to find our shape. So clearly we're looking, because she's bending over, we can see that we're going to see the top part of that rectangular shape, right? In perspective, we know that this side needs to be shorter than this side because this side is closest to us. You can represent that however exaggerated you want to. And then we're seeing this bend around. And it's coming here. So you can see it's becoming a twisting shape here. Okay. Which complicates it a little bit, but we can find it in there. So we got to remember this. I got to find my angles. So starting this picture off is, if you guys can see, is the fact that because of the way that she's bending over, we have much more mass here because it's much more front and center. And this is a little bit in the background. And when I say background, I don't mean way behind her, right? It's still part of her body, but the front part of her torso is taking center stage essentially, right? So that's why we definitely have these huge mass shifts where seeing my drawing behind here where this part is smaller and this part is way bigger. So let's try to represent that in flower. Line of action. So we got a big curve. And we know it's going somewhere down there like that. It's kind of like an S curve here almost. All right, and to find this, what we're gonna have to do is we're really gonna have to play up that stretch side versus compressed side and not overcomplicate it. Because remember, we're just drawing a sack of flour, so there aren't too many complexities that you wanna overemphasize here, or it's gonna become too complex. So first things first, we're gonna find that angle of the shoulder. We know that. And I'm literally just gonna represent this side as a really big stretch. And that's basically all I'm going to do with that side. This side's going to come in and it's going to compress into here. And then it's going to come out from here. And we're going to remember that big opposing shape side, right? And what's really going to set this off is that we're going to use our seam to show that we're only seeing a little bit of the side here. But then down here, we're seeing a lot more of the side. And then you can go ahead and draw in your flower tags here if you want. But you can see I kept this as simple as I could, because if I went in here and I drew this as like this, and then I came in and did this thing, and then, you know, now I have a shape that's going this way and this way and this way, it doesn't end up looking like it has solid mass to it. It doesn't end up looking like a solid shape really at all. So now this is the flower shape that I'm going to keep and I'm going to use. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to push it back and I'm going to draw this body shape on top of it. And we're going to see if we can figure it out. Using my flower shape, understanding the forms and stuff that I'm trying to tell myself here, let's see if we can figure out what we're working with. So definitely going to see the rib cage somewhere in here. Okay, and then remembering that she's bending over, which means we're looking at the pit of her neck right there, which means that the top of my rib cage and, you know, the spine coming out is not there. It's actually lower. We're looking at it from much lower, around somewhere down here, because her head is coming in front of her rib cage a little bit. So when we're thinking about our 3D shape and our 3D turnaround, we need to be thinking about how that form rolls around, right? So now that I have this in here, I know that she's bending over and we have a compressed side. So that means I'm not going to start, you know, her hips down here, because that's not what's happening. We have an overlapping shape where her rib cage is coming in front of where her hips are starting, right? So that means I'm starting it somewhere up here. I'm just going to draw it, follow my flower sack shape as a simple curve. And we'll have it go down into the leg a little bit there. And then knowing my stretch side, I'm going to follow that stretch. And then I know that this is where the hip kind of ends and the leg begins somewhere down here. So actually thinking about that overlapping shape a little more, I can actually place this line back. And then following through with form means that if we were going to continue to the leg, this would lead me to where my leg positioning is, just in case. But you guys can see already that I now have that torso shape, right? I could easily come in here and add on my shoulders. I can add on the shape of the breasts. You know, we could come in and add in the head shape if we wanted to. Like, so we could start figuring out our drawing from here, which is the whole point of understanding this torso. So then you can just start building it up. But the idea here is that when thinking about the torso, thinking about any kind of complex shape, any way that you can break it down is going to help you out so much in the long run. To be able to just see this shape and be like, okay, this is literally just a circle in front of another mass. And then I know that one side is being stretched and the other side is being compressed. When you can break that down in your head, you can start to come in and just go ahead and draw it so much easier. And of course, you can come in and make your changes and your exaggerations and stylize it and make it a cartoon or make it more realistic, whatever it is that you're trying to do. But having that base starting point is so important. So My challenge to you guys, and I'm going to take this challenge on too, is to draw 100 flour sacks in various positions dealing with obstacles and representing different emotions. So what you want to think about is beyond just the torso aspect of learning to draw the flour sack, but this is also a really key animation industry technique too, where if you can express emotion in something that literally is void of emotion, it's an inanimate object, then you could express emotion on anything, because it's about animating and showing that pose that we want. How can I show someone as being macho or buff or huge if they're just a flour sack? Where do I place the weight? What do I do with the pose? Is it smaller at the bottom, bigger at the top? What is the idea here? Versus also, if I want to make someone look like they're small, or what if I want to draw someone falling over? How do I show the motion there? Maybe I practice a couple different poses to see which one looks better. Can you show a flour bag twisting? Can you show it jumping in the air, smashing into the ground? Drawing all these different shapes is going to help you with your confidence of drawing figures and characters so much more than just trying to draw a pose, getting frustrated and throwing out your sketchbook paper or whatever it is, because these are the kinds of drawings that no one sees. These are going to be the drawings in your sketchbook that are just for you, and you should definitely take this challenge to draw 100 flour sacks. Try to make each one unique, see what happens. Create a story out of it if you want to. And let's take this challenge together, guys. I'm going to do this. I'll make a video of my 100 flour sacks, and hopefully you guys can show me yours too. As always, guys, thank you for watching. I hope you found this video helpful. It's definitely something that I just want you guys to play around with and have fun. Don't overthink it. If one comes out bad, move on to the next one, okay? Practice, practice, practice. All right, guys, have a great day.